In 2019, the Pokémon trading card game spiraled into madness with the release of the Tag Team GX Pokémon. Throughout the entire Sword and Shield era, the game continued to be at a low point, with new V, VMAX, and V-Star Pokémon dominating the metagame. But in 2023, after 6 months of the meta being ruled by Lugia V-Star, the yearly rotation was on the horizon, which let players say their final goodbyes to the cards released in 2020. After 4 years of chaos, it was finally time for the Pokémon trading card game to enter its modern golden age. The rotation of 2023 was arguably one of the most impactful rotations that the game had ever seen. The loss of Aurora Energy put decks like Regigigas and Lugia V-Star in dire straits. In addition, Lugia V-Star and the popular Lost Zone decks lost access to the amazing rare Pokémon, which had defined the meta for the last 6 months. Some of the best consistency cards ever printed also left the meta, leaving many players wondering how decks would have to be built going forward. The answer to this was not Scarlet and Violet's new Nest Ball, which seemed like a solid option, but it wasn't the real answer. The real answer came in much uglier form: Battle VIP Pass. Battle VIP Pass was an item card that searched the deck for 2 basic Pokémon and put them onto the bench, but it only worked on the first turn of the game. This card had previously only been used in decks that had a way to find it or were fine throwing it away if they didn't hit it turn 1, but now most decks had to utilize VIP Pass just to keep up with one another. This led to the way decks were built shifting entirely in the first few months of the Scarlet and Violet format. Many of the decks that existed before Scarlet and Violet fell off entirely, but one thing was made clear in this format: the big 3 from the previous 6 months weren't going anywhere. Lugia V-Star, despite losing almost everything in its arsenal, began to rebuild itself around the strength of the Single Strike Pokémon. Single Strike Pokémon all relied on Single Strike Energy, which was an energy that was fighting and dark, and boosted their damage by 20. While Single Strike Pokémon had previously relied on Houndoom, which could get 1 Single Strike energy from the deck each turn, Lugia V-Star gave them Archeops, which could attach 4 special energy of any kind from the deck per turn, once Lugia put 2 of them into play. These energy powered up incredibly strong attackers like Tyranitar V or Single Strike Urshifu VMAX with just 1-hit KO'd anything, and the deck also had single prize options that let this deck hit weakness against popular decks. While Lugia was much less consistent in this new format, it was still incredibly powerful and won many games just by setting up well and early. Another of the previously best decks, Lost Zone Box, continued to thrive in this meta, utilizing a new suite of attackers like Raikou V and Dragonite V to stay afloat. New builds oftentimes relied on lightning and water energy, which let them power up a litany of dangerous attackers, most dangerous of all being the spread attackers in Radiant Greninja and Kyogre. Mew VMAX, of course, stayed afloat, losing very little to the rotation. It thrived in this new meta that rewarded its disruptive gameplay and countered decks like Lugia and Lost Zone with Path of the Peak. Let's not just talk about the old stuff though, we're here for Scarlet and Violet. Scarlet and Violet reintroduced Pokémon EX to the game. These Pokémon gave up 2 prize cards when they were knocked out, but they had to evolve normally through an evolution line if they were an evolved Pokémon, unlike the Pokémon V. Scarlet and Violet also introduced Terra Pokémon EX, which were a subset of EX Pokémon that had this little box here that made them immune to damage, I guess, for some reason. They also had the ability to change type, but that would not be the case for the first set. 2 EXs in Scarlet and Violet stood far above the rest: Miraidon EX and Gardevoir EX. Miraidon was undoubtedly the poster child of the set, brandishing its incredible tandem unit ability that allowed players to search their deck for 2 basic lightning Pokemon and put them onto the bench. If you grabbed another Miraidon EX, you could even use another tandem unit to grab 2 more guys. The scariest thing about Miraidon was Electric Generator, a successor of the old Max Elixir card that let players check the top 5 cards of their deck and attach up to 2 lightning energy they found there to their benched lightning Pokemon. This worked perfectly with Miraidon, since Miraidon would clear Pokemon on the deck, ensuring that your generator was more likely to work. It was clear that Miraidon would be a very good deck, but initially the deck struggled. People did not yet settle on a way to build Miraidon EX, bouncing between builds that used Regieleki VMAX to boost damage, or gimmicky builds that incorporated Magnezone V-Star to gain an edge on evolution decks. Miraidon EX ended up earning itself the name of Mid-Rhydon due to its poor results following release. But it was only a matter of time. Gardevoir EX, on the other hand, was the other most hyped new EX from the set, and for good reason. The Psychic Embrace ability lets players attach as many Psychic energy as they like from their discard pile to their Psychic Pokemon. but each time they do so, that Pokemon takes 20 damage. This is arguably one of the best abilities ever printed in the Pokémon TCG. Previous energy acceleration abilities like Malamar's Psychic Recharge saw play for just attaching 1 energy from the discard per turn. Here was an ability that let you do it as often as you like, at the small cost of taking damage. It was immediately obvious to everyone that this ability was going to be good. It paired exceptionally well with previously released cards, especially the Kirlia from Silver Tempest, which had the Refinement ability, which discarded a card from your hand and drew 2 cards. This allowed Gardevoir EX decks to quickly get their Psychic Energy in the discard pile and get a bit of draw for doing so. Another Kirlia from Chilling Reign could use its Mirage Step to search the deck for up to 3 Kirlia and put them onto the bench, letting these Gardevoir decks get an incredibly strong start even if they had a bad turn 1. Finally, Gardevoir from Chilling Reign really filled out the deck, since it could use Shining Arcana to look at the top 2 cards of your deck and attach any basic energy found there to the Pokemon, then draw whatever cards weren't attached. This provided the deck additional draw while also attaching energy to your Pokemon without damaging them. This was especially important for Gardevoir from Chilling Reign with its Brainwave attack, which did 60 plus 30 for each Psychic Energy attached to Gardevoir. This attack paired incredibly well of course with Gardevoir EX's ability, and of course with Shining Arcana as well. Initially, people struggled to find the right build for Gardevoir EX, since there was so much untapped potential, and also just because people were not used to seeing this weird thing called a Stage 2 after 4 years of Sword and Shield and tag teams. Some lists decided to pair it with Mewtwo V Union, which was one that I played. It was incredibly fun, and it worked somewhat well, since Kirlia could also discard Mewtwo V Union pieces so that they could be summoned from the discard pile when you got all 4 of them. It eventually became evident that Gardevoir would be paired with a couple other key attackers in Cresselia from Lost Origin, which gave it a better Lost Zone matchup, and Zacian V, a powerful attacker capable of doing more damage than Brainwave Gardevoir. Of course, these new decks weren't the only ones to succeed in the Scarlet and Violet metagame. Arceus V-Star popped back into the spotlight, especially this Arctina variant, which paired Arceus V-Star and Giratina V-Star. This new Squovit from Scarlet and Violet put a player's hand on the bottom of the deck and drew 1 card. Paired great with Bibarel from Brilliant Stars, which could draw back up to 5 cards in hand. Another Arceus deck with Umbreon VMAX and Duraludon VMAX called Arcdom also began to see success, utilizing Dark Weakness and Special Energy Walling to counter popular decks. Lost Zone Giratina also popped back into the meta after Silver Tempest Lugia had virtually erased it. Giratina V-Star's power and the Lost Zone's trickiness put this deck as a strong choice in the meta for the entire year. Whispers of new rogue decks were everywhere too. Some were less good like Oinkologne EX, while others showed promise and eventual greatness such as Rapid Strike and Teleon VMAX. Maybe the most interesting rogue deck from the set was a Dialga V-Star Magnezone deck. These 2 cards were not new, but this deck utilized an interesting new engine revolving around Miraidon EX to find your basic lightning Pokemon and Rotom V. Rotom V was a previously underused card that would end your turn and draw 3 cards. What this showed was that Rotom V was a pretty solid card in this new rotation, especially for decks using Stage 2s. This would be very relevant going forward. While the Scarlet and Violet meta was pretty solid, it was missing a couple of things. Solid hand disruption for one, which made decks have to rely on spamming Judge to beat Lost Zone decks. Solid Pokemon recovery would also be appreciated. And while we're at it, why not bring back a Blast from the Past archetype? And Paldea Evolved would deliver on all of those promises. Sorry to interrupt your history, but if you've been enjoying this video, I'd appreciate it if you could give it a like. Your support keeps these videos coming. Consider subscribing as well so you don't miss my bi-weekly uploads. Paldea Evolved introduced Iono to the game, a new disruption supporter that had each player shuffle their hand and then put it on the bottom of their deck. Then they drew a card for each of the remaining prize cards. It's like the bastard child of Marnie and Rocket's admin, or Marnie and N for those of us who don't qualify for AARP. This gave slower decks like Gardevoir a huge step up in the meta, since they'd have strong draw supporters in the early game and a strong disruption card to help them in the late game. Paldea Evolved also reintroduced Super Rod, a superb Pokemon recovery card that fit into almost every deck, shuffling 3 Pokemon or basic energy back into the deck. Paldea Evolved also introduced Reversal Energy, which was a new energy that provided 3 of any type of energy to an evolved, non-rule box Pokemon if that player was losing the game. Does anyone know of a slow deck that loves using single prize evolution attackers? Me neither. Just kidding, of course Gardevoir EX became properly broken with this set. All of the new additions from Paldea Evolved seemed to be tailor-made for Gardevoir to succeed, and it quickly became a staple deck for years to come. A new blast from the past also released in the set with Chien-Pao EX with Baxcalibur. Baxcalibur allowed players to attach as many water energy from their hand to their Pokemon however they like, while Chien-Pao made the perfect attacker. Chien-Pao's ability searched the deck for 2 water energy and put them into their hand. It's paired wonderfully with Baxcalibur, which could instantly attach those energy. Chien-Pao's Hail Blade attack would then discard as many energy from your board as you like and do 60 for each energy you discarded. This worked wonderfully with the reprint of Superior Energy Retrieval, which could get those energy back after they had been discarded by Chien-Pao, or by the other best attacker in this deck, Radiant Greninja, which provided consistency and a brutal attack. This deck also revitalized Palkia V-Star, which had been on the downtrend lately, as Palkia could provide a quick burst of damage or energy into play. Speaking of revitalizing, maybe nothing was as legendary as the comeback of Rapid Strike, which had previously been relatively absent from the meta for nearly a year. During the Scarlet and Violet format, it had its few fans and a few small results, but during Paldea Evolved is when it really made itself known again, by winning the North American International Championships when piloted by Cyrus Davis. Paldea Evolved also released a sneakily new powerful counter card in Spiritomb, which used its Fettered in Misfortune ability to turn off the abilities of all basic Pokemon V in play. This counter card seemingly put Mew VMAX out of business, since a deck that relied on using Genesect V to draw any cards would be completely helpless against Spiritomb. Mew VMAX couldn't possibly deal with Spiritomb, or so we all thought. The World Championships 2023 was on the horizon, and everyone's eyes were on the prize. Maybe nobody more than Tord Reklev, who had now accomplished the impossible during the season and won the 4th international championship title he was missing from his accomplishments. With this, Tord Reklev sought the last major title he was missing, a World Championship victory. In the finals of this World Championship, however, a certain roadblock came up. As it turned out, Mew VMAX wasn't dead. It was just ignored. And the ignored Mew VMAX is the most dangerous one. In the top 8 cut of the World Championships, there was 3 Mew VMAX decks. It wasn't even down and out. Mew VMAX was at the top of its game, and it was here for its revenge. And it took that revenge in one of the greatest sets of Pokemon played on the big stage, where Tord Reklev was eventually punished by the slow pace of his Gardevoir deck that forced him to make awkward plays to avoid losing on time. And that's all it took for Mew VMAX to take its revenge and take the World Championships of 2023 when piloted by Vance Kelly. Some other notable decks stood out the event. One of these was a new colorless build of Lugia V-Star, which utilized special energy released by Paldea Evolved and some great colorless attackers. This ended up winning the Seniors Division of the World Championship, piloted by Gabriel Fernandez. Miraidon EX also finally proved its mettle, when players such as Sejun Park and Andrew Mahone piloted the deck to solid results. NAIC winner Cyrus Davis also used a Chien-Pao EX paired with Palkia V-Star to top 16 the event notably. While the event was definitely dominated by Lost Zone style decks, this World Championship format will be remembered for being a skillful and diverse format with lots of meaningful deck building and in-game decisions to be made. Following the 2023 World Championships, we'd get Obsidian Flames, another set that would alter the metagame. There were 2 new EX cards at the top of people's minds, Charizard EX and Pidgeot EX. Charizard EX was a type-changed Dark Terra EX Pokemon that had in its Infernal Rain ability that accelerated up to 3 fire energy from your deck to your board however you like. This powered up both Charizard EX's attack, but could also be used to power up alternate attackers. The Burning Darkness attack would do 180 damage, but do 30 more damage for each prize card the opponent had taken. This was an attack that was quite respectable in the early game, but as the game went on, Charizard EX became a terror. This was even more true considering Charizard EX often paired with Radiant Charizard, a Radiant Fire-type Pokemon which could attack for less energy when the opponent had taken more prize cards. You have to take prize cards to win the game, but if you did, you risk getting demolished by Charizard EX. Pidgeot EX was the other piece of the Charizard deck. It used its Quick Search ability, which once per turn can find any card from the deck. Believe it or not, when you reprint one of the strongest effects ever printed from Generation 3, it's still strong 2 decades later. Quick Search let Charizard set up and find cards to pull off combos for the entire game. Charizard was immediately a strong deck in the meta, with the biggest debate being how to build it. With so much space in the deck, there was almost anything you could do with Charizard EX. One of the most popular ways to build Charizard EX borrowed from the Dialga V-Star Magnezone deck that came out in Scarlet Violet, since Charizard EX could also use Rotom V to great effect. With Rotom V out, this deck could use Forest Sealstone to help it get a Stage 2 Pokemon on the board as soon as possible. Obsidian Flames kinda flew by though, pun intended. It was definitely the weakest metagame of the year with the influx of Lugia V-Star around, but introducing Charizard EX to the metagame definitely made things more interesting. Things would only get more interesting though come Paradox Rift, the final set of 2023. Paradox Rift introduced a couple of new mechanics to the game, Ancient and Future. There was nothing mechanically unique about these cards, but they interacted with other cards of their type to create scary combos. The most immediately impactful of the Ancient cards was Roaring Moon EX. Its main attack, Frenzied Gouging, instantly knocks out the opponent's active Pokemon, but Roaring Moon takes 200 damage of recoil. There was no question that this attack was incredibly strong. The only question remained, how best to use it. Ross Cawthon realized that Roaring Moon EX works really well with Galarian Moltres V, when he piloted the deck to top 64 and then a top 8 placement at Charlotte Regionals. Galarian Moltres could attach energy to itself from the discard pile, making an already potent attacker, but then you could use Energy Switch to move that energy to Roaring Moon. With the help of Professor Sada's Vitality and new Ancient Supporter card and Dark Patch, this deck was easily able to set up a Roaring Moon repeatedly to attack with Frenzied Gouging. The other scariest Paradox Pokemon from the set was Iron Hands EX. Players lamented the effect Iron Hands EX would have on the metagame, since its Ampu Very Much attack would take an extra prize card if it knocked out a Pokemon. While this attack only does 120 damage, it's very easy to sweep a slower setup deck like Gardevoir if decks could just attack with Iron Hands very early on. Miraidon EX was the first to include Iron Hands into its repertoire of lightning attackers since it could find and set up Iron Hands easily with the help of Electric Generator. Miraidon with Iron Hands flipped Miraidon's bad matchups into slower decks on their head, if they were lucky enough, of course, to launch an Ampu Very Much for 2 prize cards. Iron Hands EX also fit well into Chen Pao decks, which was an underrated deck in this format. Baxcalibur could help power it up to launch early amps. In a true blast from the past fashion, this deck now teched a lightning energy in the deck to help it use Iron Hands, which was made easier since the Earthen Vessel item card helped search basic energy from the deck. This mirrors almost the exact style of the old Blastoise Keldeo EX deck, which also loved to run lightning energy so it could tech the menacing Black Kyurem EX. Both of the new headliner Paradox Pokemon were also welcome additions to some Lost Zone Pox decks, which used their very powerful attacks to great effect. Paradox Rift also released a new Jirachi card that could use its stellar availability to prevent damage counters from being placed on benched Pokemon by your opponent's attacks from their basic Pokemon. Mainly this was finally a counter to the Lost Zone style boxes, which relied on Sableye's Lost Mine to take multiple knockouts. The other new Paradox deck was built around Iron Valiant EX, which had the Tachyon Invincibility, which placed 20 damage on one of your opponent's Pokemon when Iron Valiant hits the active spot. Iron Valiant could use multiple Tachyon bits by using switch cards or retreating for free with Booster Energy Capsule, allowing this deck to take multiple knockouts on the first turn of the game potentially, or just set up damage for later. The most iconic Iron Valiant deck was definitely Iron Valiant with Entei V. This deck used Entei V as an efficient fire attacker that could be powered up easily with the Magma Basin Stadium, allowing it to attack whenever with its Burning Rondo. Many other decks using older cards also continued to succeed. Arceus V-Star newly paired up with Regigigas V-Star for an extremely disruptive and strong Arceus deck. Spread decks like Rapid Strike and Teleon VMAX gained a new lease on life in this format from the release of Technical Machine Devolution, a new card that let them devolve the opponent's entire board as their attack. Mew VMAX, of course, continued to succeed in this metagame that continued to revolve even more around Path of Peak to slow down decks. Even rogue decks like the new Goldengo EX and Cloth popped up in this metagame. I've been neglecting to mention one card though, one card that completely redefined Paradox Rift, being Counter Catcher. Counter Catcher is a card that allows players to bring a benched Pokemon to the active spot if they were behind on prize cards as an item. This card existed during Sun and Moon, but nobody could have prepared the player base for how strong its Scarlet and Violet reprint would end up being. The first effect of Counter Catcher was enabling control and stall style decks once again. Snorlax stall rolled into frame using Snorlax from Pokemon Go, which had the block ability to prevent opponents from retreating. This deck preyed on liability bench Pokemon that many decks ran since it could bring them up and just leave them there. Pidgeot control decks also began to see play, relying on Pidgeot's quick search and many tricky Pokemon to create a board state that the opponent could not handle. The others enabled by Counter Catcher were what I call the big three of the format: Lost Zone Giratina V-Star, Gardevoir EX, and Charizard EX. Lost Zone Giratina V-Star continued to thrive in this format, using its power and disruption with Path to the Peak to shut down the other two big decks. Charizard EX greatly benefited from the addition of Counter Catcher, which let it get more value out of its mandatory Arven Supporter card. The biggest winner of this format, though, was once again Gardevoir EX. Gardevoir EX greatly welcomed Counter Catcher into its arsenal, which meant the deck could gust a Pokemon and disrupt the opponent's hand with Iono in the exact same turn. The other most important addition from Paradox Rift to Gardevoir is Screamtail, an attacker that does 20 damage times the amount of damage counters on Screamtail to one of your opponent's Pokemon. These three decks were definitely the strongest decks of the format by some margin, winning a majority of the event, but they were definitely not the only decks in the format. One thing that really stands out about this Paradox Rift format is the incredible variety of decks present. V-Star Pokemon continued to succeed with Arceus and Giratina, Fusion Strike and Rapid Strike were both great options, Ancient and Future Pokemon both had their place in decks, Lost Zone style decks of course continued to succeed, EXs like Gardevoir and Miraidon, Terra EXs and Charizard, Radiance, Basic, Stage 1, Stage 2, Single Prize, Multi-Prize Control. Whatever the heck it is, sure. This format really had every single kind of deck imaginable. For the 4 months that this format lasted, it felt like Pokemon was finally free of the shackles that had been placed on it in 2019. For 4 long years, Pokemon went through its modern Dark Ages, an era of the game that I do not look back on fondly. Games were often simple, and card design seemed to fall on the whims of whatever the designers thought would be really cool, rather than what would make games more enjoyable for its core player base. Not every single format of Scarlet and Violet is going to be as strong as the best ones from 2023. But I can confidently say that Scarlet and Violet saved the Pokémon TCG from its calamity. We are in the golden age of modern Pokémon. There was also another golden age of modern Pokémon I'd like to talk about someday, but that's of course for another day. Stay tuned to the Whimsicast, and thank you all so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.